9. Drakensberg. Ace awoke in darkness. She tried to move, and found to her horror that she was fastened upright in a T-shape by manacles at her wrists and ankles. She could feel stone, cold against her back. There was a sudden blaze of light. Burning torches were held close to her face, and in their flickering light she saw sinister, black-robed, black-cowled forms grouped around her in a semicircle. They fell back to reveal an even more ghastly figure, a black-robed priest in a hideous goat mask. He carried an enormous ceremonial knife with a huge curved blade, and he was stalking towards her. The razor-edged blade touched her throat, and she felt the sting as it drew blood. Ace prided herself on being tough, but waking up to find herself in the middle of a horror movie was just too much for her. She screamed and fainted dead away. Hastily paying off his taxi in Komprinzenstrasse, the doctor rushed up the path to the front door of the old house, and made himself pause and calm down. It wasn't certain, after all, that Ace was in any danger. He'd look like a fool if he hurtled in like the US cavalry and found Ace sipping tea and eating cream cakes with a gang of old lady librarians. He studied the brass plate. He looked thoughtfully at the bell pull. He was just about to give it a heave when he noticed that the front door was very slightly ajar. Cautiously, the doctor pushed it open and went inside. He went up the polished staircase calling, "Hello! Anyone about?" There was no reply. He went into the visitors' library and saw, like Ace before him, the glass-fronted bookcases and the big central table with its surrounding chairs. There was a gap, as if one chair was missing. All in all, about as quiet and respectable a place as you could wish to find, thought the doctor. All the danger and excitement of a trip to the local library. The only thing at all out of place was the huge crystal ball in the centre of the polished table. The doctor guessed that this was the refined, upmarket end of the supernatural business. A few seances for rich old ladies, a bit of crystal gazing. Was it simply a nest of cunning conmen after all? Or was there more to it than that? There was. The doctor was just about to start searching the rest of the building for some clue to what had become of Ace, when he noticed that a glow was coming from the crystal ball. He leaned over it, staring into its cloudy depths. Suddenly a picture began to form. It was Ace. Ace chained to a wall in some kind of dungeon, surrounded by black-cowled figures. Ace menaced by a hideously masked figure holding a knife to her throat. A close-up of the knife touching Ace's throat, of the thin line of blood, of Ace screaming. The picture faded. The doctor stood quite still, hands resting on the table. After a few minutes, the picture started to reform. Ace chained to the dungeon wall, Ace surrounded by cowled figures, Ace menaced by the priest in the goat mask, Ace screaming. It faded, and then returned, the same little sequence playing through again and again. All right, I get the message," shouted the doctor. Snatching up the heavy crystal ball, he hurled it at the wall with amazing force, smashing it into a million tiny pieces. The doctor went over to the fragments and studied them. No trace of electronic circuitry, nothing but crystal fragments. So much for his theory that Kriegsleiter and the Black Coven were simple swindlers. To project and repeat a telepathic image loop like that showed power of a very advanced kind. It was a message, of course, a message for him. It said simply, "Ace is in our hands. If we choose, we can kill her." In a way, it was like the invitation that Ace had accepted in his place, only now Ace herself was the invitation. They wanted him to come to them. "Dilly, dilly, come and be killed," sang the doctor softly. He would have to go, of course. He would have to rescue Ace, settle with Kriegsleiter, and get them both free again. But how? Ace awoke again. This time it was better. She was curled up on a fur-covered couch, and she was warm and comfortable. She stretched. If this was another dream, it was much better than the last one. Too many late-night horror movies, she thought. She opened her eyes and looked around. She was in a largish room, more or less triangular, except that the outer wall, the one with the window, was curved. The room was shaped, thought Ace sleepily, like a slice of pie. The walls were of stone and looked very thick, but some effort had been made to make the place comfortable. There were brightly coloured heraldic shields on the walls, fur rugs, more furs strewn on the chairs and couches. Whoever owned the place definitely wasn't into animal rights. She went to the window, which was open but barred, and looked out. Ahead and below was a wide vista of rolling wooded countryside. Ace felt that not only her window but the building itself was raised high above the surrounding countryside. The castle, for that was what it felt like, must be built on a hill. She heard faint shouting coming from directly below her and craned her neck to look out and down. In a courtyard below, a squad of muscular blonde young men stripped to the waist were going through a complicated series of exercises under the shouted orders of an instructor. Just my luck, thought Ace. The place is full of bare-chested blonde hunks, and I'm locked up in here. At least, I suppose I'm locked in. She went to the massive oak door and tried to open it. To her astonishment, it opened. She found herself on a wide stone staircase which wound down to an enormous circular chamber, a vast stone hall divided into different areas. Ace stood at the top of the stairs, studying the busy scene below her. It was an amazing, complex sight. All kinds of different activities were going on simultaneously in the different sections. One area held weapons racks carrying everything from Luger automatics to grenades, rifles and machine guns. Here, black uniformed SS men were stripping and cleaning an assortment of weapons. In front of the weapons area, so vast was the hall, was a parade ground where another squad of SS men was being drilled by an instructor. There was what looked like a high-tech medical area, where machines hummed and buzzed. In this section, still more SS men lay rigidly to attention on simple military cots, which radiated like the spokes of a wheel from a vast central console. The men lay head inwards, and each man wore an oddly designed helmet linked by electronic cables to the consoles. Even as Ace watched, the men, moving as one, took the helmets from their heads, swung their legs from the bed and stood to attention. A second group of men was taking their place, even as the first group formed a squad and marched away. In the centre of the room was an open-plan control centre. Its illuminated screens held maps of Germany, of Europe, of Africa, of Asia. In fact, Ace saw all of the world. Standing in front of the map of Europe was Dr. Kriegsleiter. Beside him was the sneering caretaker of the Aryan Research Institute. There was something very different about him now. He wore a strange black uniform with a high-collared jacket. He wasn't wearing his thick glasses, and his whole bearing was that of a soldier rather than a scholar. He glanced briefly at Ace, and then went back to studying the maps, making marks on the screen with a light pencil. Kriegsleiter looked up as Ace came down the stairs and crossed the floor of the hall towards him. "Ah, there you are. I trust you are rested. Are your quarters comfortable?" "They are now," said Ace bluntly. "When I first woke up I was in some kind of dungeon, surrounded by weirdies. Unless it was just a nightmare." She broke off with a gasp as she caught sight of one of the monitor screens. On it, she saw herself chained to the dungeon wall, surrounded by black cowled figures. She saw herself shrink from the priest with the knife, saw her own silent scream. The sequence was repeated again and again and again. "What on earth?" Kriegsleiter smiled, red lips curling in the white beard. "You might call it a trailer, my dear, as they say in the cinema, a preview of coming attractions. It was recorded for the benefit of your friend, the doctor." He flicked a switch, and the picture changed to a close-up of the doctor, leaning forward, peering intently at something. "He is studying it now, you see. Very soon he will have to take action." "What kind of action?" "He will come here to find you, to save you if he can." "Where's here?" "You are in the castle of Drachensberg, my dear, hundreds of miles from Berlin. This castle was purchased by Himmler in person for the use of the SS. The castle tower, where we are now, is reserved for the members of the Black Coven, an inner elite group, the psychic shock troops of the SS. Ace looked around the hall. "All this stuff, this high-tech equipment, it's not from here and now, is it? Are you from another time, another planet?" The sneering man swung round. "Both," he said proudly. "We are the warlords." He went back to the screens. This meant nothing to Ace, so she ignored it. She glanced at the monitor. Suddenly the picture fragmented and broke up. The doctor's face vanished, and the screen went black. The one who called himself a warlord studied a control console. "He's broken the receiving unit." Kriegslater chuckled. "Ah, the doctor grows impatient. It won't be long now." "What are you talking about?" said Ace. "You said we were hundreds of miles from Berlin. The doctor doesn't know where I am or how to get here. And even if he did, he's not allowed to leave Berlin." "The answers to all those questions are in the Berlin office of the Aryan Bureau, where we first met, if you remember." "I remember," said Ace grimly. She touched the lump on the back of her head. "Well, that is where the doctor is now." Kriegslater laughed again. "I have great faith in his ingenuity. He will find the way. Of course, we mustn't make it too easy for him. That would spoil all the fun." The picture loop of Ace in the dungeon replaced that of the doctor on the screen. She glanced at it for a moment and then turned away in disgust. "I don't think much of your idea of fun. Are you telling me you staged all that nasty business in the dungeon just to make the doctor think I was in danger?" "We recorded it to distress him," corrected Kriegslater. "But I'm afraid you really are in danger. The choosing is only a preliminary, but it is still an important ceremony in its own right." "What do you mean, ceremony?" asked Ace nervously. "Exactly what I say, my dear. The priest, in this instance myself, inspects the chosen one and finds her acceptable. In token of this, his knife takes a first taste of her blood." Ace touched her fingers to her neck. To her horror, she felt a tiny scar. "You said a preliminary ceremony. Preliminary to what?" "To the great sacrifice, of course. A ceremony of dedication to the old Teutonic gods. You, my dear, are to be the traditional virgin sacrifice. I do hope you are qualified." To her disgust, Ace found herself blushing a furious red. Kriegslater waved dismissively. "It really doesn't matter. We certainly won't let a mere technicality stand in our way. The whole thing is nonsense anyway, to be honest. I made most of the sacred ritual up myself. Still, it impresses Himmler and his cronies, and that's what matters." The horror of what he was saying was so great that Ace found it hard to take seriously. She could scarcely take it all in. Kriegslater glanced at the sky through one of the arrow slits in the wall of the tower. "Time's getting on. I do hope the doctor won't be too long. I'd hate him to miss your big moment."